DJI is a very popular brand. Their range of drones and cameras have kept consumers happy for over a decade and have grown to become the dominant force in camera drones. You don't get there by chance. The company has worked tirelessly to produce consistently high quality products that now create such a buzz that the announcement of an upcoming release can send the internet into meltdown. Now, nobody is perfect, and whether it is an overheating action camera, GPS denied drone, or an FPV problem child that no one is completely sure what to do with, DJI does have its share of consumer controversy and issues. This, however, pales into insignificance when you put it next to the issues that some in US government and federal agencies seem to have with DJI as a company. We are regularly bombarded with the headlines telling us that DJI should not be trusted and how they are being added to this list and gaining these sanctions. With yet another article released recently, our viewers have been contacting Geeksvana to ask what is going on. Well, today we're going to unpick all of this a little and get to the bottom of whether or not a ban on DJI products in the USA is something we could see in 2022. This really started in any kind of serious fashion when focus was put on the data that DJI drones can collect. For some considerable time, the onus was placed on data collection and what could potentially happen to that data when it travels out of the US to a Chinese server. Over the period of years, blows were exchanged between pro and anti-DJI sources to try and prove and disprove that any data was at risk. Although there were issues found within the apps used by DJI, the company also took steps to ensure that enterprise users could keep their data locally. There are a lot of steps to the process back and forth, but really there was no smoking gun to prove anything truly nefarious was happening to data, but I don't feel like either side came out of it with a clear win. There were many restrictions put into place and policies set to not use DJI drones around critical infrastructure or by federal agencies, etc. This all seemed to effectively move towards a bit of a Cold War in the sense that the US federal government distanced itself and didn't allow the use of the drones, whilst the consumer side of things was left completely untouched. Then you move into the more recent moves against DJI, including their placement on the US Department of Commerce Entity List. The move was carried out under the banner of human rights issues this time, moving on from the focus on data issues. The human rights issues that were raised focused on the use of DJI tech by Chinese authorities against minorities. This put DJI alongside a list of almost 80 companies that were deemed worthy of restrictions. Essentially, what this did was limit DJI's ability to procure US-made technology and components that its products had formerly relied on. Now, although DJI does not confirm who their suppliers are, the areas of immediate impact were thought to include things like smart battery tech from Texas Instruments, some legacy thermal equipment, although DJI did of course release a newer lineup, vision chips from Intel and Ambarella, and most noticeably to the end user, DJI mobile apps being available in certain services like the Google Play Store. So apart from causing what were undoubtedly significant headaches internally for DJI, the impact wasn't felt too much by the end user, especially with things like the pandemic and chip shortages putting most tech companies in a position of delaying releases and having product shortages. Perhaps in a normal world we would have seen more obvious signs of the impact of the entity list, but who knows. We can talk about whether these restrictions have had an impact on the quality and the products themselves, but that's a separate subject and a video all of itself. More recently, DJI was placed on another restricted list, banning US investment in the company. The move from the US Treasury Department was perhaps aimed at blocking a move to legitimise DJI as a partly US entity. We've no way of knowing. Certainly there were no other impacts felt, as DJI are of course a privately owned company. Again, all of these sanctions did little to impact the consumer. Although what was inside that drone in terms of chips might be different, a consumer could still walk into Best Buy and grab themselves a DJI drone in minutes. Since then, we have had some voices such as Commissioner Brendan Carr, who is the senior Republican of the FCC, call for a wider ban on DJI products, with accusations focusing on a wide range of issues, including whether the drones can record things like your heart rate. Now, whether or not you feel Mr. Carr's accusations are accurate or even remotely valid, he plans to place DJI on the FCC Covered List. Yeah, I know, another list. This list, however, has more significant impact to the consumer. due to recent changes that have now been signed into law. Any company that is placed on the covered list will not be able to gain an FCC license for their products. The FCC press public notice calls it a list of communications equipment and services, covered list, that are deemed to pose an unacceptable risk to the national security of the United States or the security and safety of United States persons. Now, this would effectively ban new DJI drone models in the US market, as they would not be available by any retailer, and even grey imports would not be licensed for use. Mr. Carr cleverly used the cover list, beefing up to promote his own agenda against DJI, and we're told that there are no formal moves underway to add DJI to the covered list, but this can change very quickly. We have a video explaining the noise surrounding the FCC covered list in DJI, linked in the description below. This brings us up to date and the next blow to DJI, at least in political terms. A Washington Post article has reported that despite DJI claims to the contrary, documents have been found to show that 4 investment bodies owned or administered by Beijing have invested in DJI in recent years. This includes a state asset manager that has pledged to play a key role in promoting partnerships between Chinese private enterprises and the military. Now, we're not about to break apart what constitutes actual backing and who said what. For our audience, the main concern is over whether or not this impacts the DJI drones on the shelves. Well, Brendan Carr was raised for comment in the Washington Post article, and he was just as ferocious over the issues and the threat he feels DJI poses. But as we stand at the moment, this is a purely political move that is so far being played out in the press and public meetings. The time to be more concerned will be when and if the FCC begin the formal process of considering DJI for the FCC covered list. Now, it should be remembered that if such a thing happens, it will not impact the drone in your home, but any new models requiring an FCC license. So certainly DJI drones would not get approved. So effectively, that would ban these drones from US consumers. How this will impact existing products and whether those will remain in shops is unclear, as the FCC may seek to withdraw those existing licenses. So really the big question here is whether or not the anti-DJI political agenda will have enough power to convert into what would be the first meaningful sanctions on the Chinese drone maker that would impact consumers directly. So far, although the entity list and other sanctions have caused significant issues for DJI, it has not really had much bearing on consumers. So to answer the main question this video raises, will there be a DJI ban in the US in 2022? That for me depends on how much evidence and weight can be placed behind the findings in the Washington Post and if anything else is in the pipeline. Personally, I would give a cautious and highly caveated opinion of no. I do not think a DJI US ban will come into place via the covered list in 2022. We do need to look at what kind of impact the existing sanctions have had on DJI product releases and performance, but as I said before, that will be the subject of an upcoming video. So if you are new here, hit the subscribe button, and for more on this story, you can click here to watch this video, which is the one previously mentioned regarding the FCC potential sanctions on DJI.